Do you have to have good contracts to win a Stanley Cup? We're going to talk about that. Plus, Matthew Tkachuk, is he cursed? All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I am here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find us over on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts to get our latest episodes, so make sure you are subscribed here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Friday, Gil.
Happy Friday, Rachel. Can't believe we're in August already.
I know we're getting closer. We're starting to have some of these preseason junior tournaments happening to start draft coverage for next year's draft already, including like the Holinka Cup. We just had the World Junior Summer Showcase. And so hockey is around the corner for sure here. But for Matthew Tkachuk, it looks like it'll be a little bit longer before he returns to action. And, you know, the injuries that he has been dealing with ever since Four Nations, obviously, as hockey players are wont to do, he pushed through them in the Stanley Cup playoffs and helped lead the Florida Panthers to a Stanley Cup. But it's looking like it will take its toll, and it could be, a couple months at least, or even up until the Olympics before he's back in the lineup for Florida.
Yeah, and that can't be good for the Panthers on the ice. It obviously affects them in a lot of ways. He gives them a lot of talent, grit, a lot of different elements, leadership, and yet doesn't open up opportunities for them if they use LTIR the right way.
Well, it could. And, that's all related to the contracts discussion we are going to get into a little bit later in the show. But, it is interesting because related to the Olympics and Four Nations, he was already named to the USA Olympic roster. When they announced those initial 6 players for each team, Matthew Tkachuk was on that list. So, we'll see if he's ready to go for that, but there could be a potential opening, on Team USA there as well.
Yeah, you don't know. And obviously we wish him a complete and speedy recovery. Don't want any setbacks. But, and I guess the other question that comes up in my mind is, he suffers the injury at Four Nations. It's a risk. It's a risk every time you participate in one of those tournaments or the Olympics, where injuries that happen at these exhibitions or tournaments can have an impact on who wins the Stanley Cup, how far a team goes in the playoffs, or even just the cap space that a team has when setting up a playoff roster.
Absolutely. I think, the other, tongue-in-cheek side of this, asking, is he cursed? Well, he is the EA Sports NHL 26 cover boy. And, for him, obviously the picture of him holding the Stanley Cup is magnificent. And, you can't take that away from him or this achievement away from him. But there's always been this sort of, is the cover guy cursed?
Right.
Commentary in the background, and the team of the guy on the cover tends to not do well that year in the next season. And now he's hurt and is going to be out. Now, you can't really say, well, will that curse also fall on Brady? Because in the deluxe edition, obviously we have Brady and Dad Keith on the cover as well, which is actually kind of cool.
I
right?
like that. I do like that. Getting generational too. I like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, just not having the current superstar there, that having the whole family on the cover of that deluxe edition is really cool. But we'll see if it turns into a curse or a blessing in terms of having this, time off for him to recover as we head into the season. But, you mentioned how this injury could affect the Florida Panthers contract situation. And I think Florida must, and Bill Zito must have known what the situation was with Matthew Tkachuk when they were negotiating all their contracts. And, it makes them, I think, more likely to sign a Brad Marchand, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
to a longer term contract than maybe they would have because they need him.
Right. Right. And then obviously, the other thing is Tkachuk doesn't shy away from the physical aspect of the game. Maybe you need reinforcements because injuries are going to happen when you play that style of hockey.
Correct. And that's kind of one of the mitigating factors here, that you can't just look at contracts in a vacuum. But The Athletic tried to do that, right? They've done this for the last couple of years, and we'll put a link to the article from last year and this year in the show notes so you know what we're referring to here. But they have gone through this exercise that's very exhaustive and gone through all the numbers and crunched and look at contract value now and looking forward. So that's essentially what they did. They started out and looked at individual contracts and put out articles saying these are like the best contracts in the NHL currently, and these are the worst contracts. And then they tried to consolidate everything and look at team contract value and give them letter grades and then rank it all. And I think it's a really interesting exercise. I'm not sure if it's predictive of anything, but that's what we're going to get into right here. So I think that when you look at what they have done here, they are very clear that it's about what does this contract look like now and potentially in the future. It does not account what has happened in the past. So this is all about forecasting into the future. And they look at age, they look at stats. They kind of have this magic formula in the background that gives a team a total grade based on the sum total of the individual grades of all the contracts. And I think, for me, that's where I somewhat have an issue with the methodology, because if a contract is good on the day that it's signed, like, it's a good contract, in my opinion.
It has good elements to it. Look, there's always a certain amount of luck involved. Obviously, you could sign a star player to a really good contract, and injuries could happen and destroy the player's career, and you get no return on that contract. So there are elements that are out of your control, but
right,
some contracts age better than others. Let's also put it that way.
That's true. When we're going to get into some of those mitigating factors in the next segment. But I think that, when you're looking at this methodology and they're saying, okay, now looking into the future, they're looking at term, they're looking at what's the overall salary cap growth going to look like. And so then what percentage of the cap is that contract going to be now and 2-3 years from now,
Right.
because it may behoove a team to sign what seems like an overpay now, but knowing that the cap is going to increase. And that could be a good contract then, even though it on paper now, based on what the cap is now, it could look very bad.
Yeah, and then it could work the other way. You sign a player who is 30 to a 7-year extension. Years 1, 2, and 3, you may get very good production out of that player. As they start to slow down, as they start to age, the salary and the cap hit stays the same, the production dips. And so you get really good value in years 1, 2, and 3, and years 4 through 7 could be diminishing returns.
Right. And I think that's a huge part of it. But there are these other mitigating factors. So we're going to look at, what they rated in 2024. So last summer versus the results, and see if they were right in using contract efficiency as a predictive tool of success. We're going to get into that coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you could splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it all possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. The prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal? Game Time Zone Deals pick the best seats in your section for you. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right. So The Athletic very interestingly ranked the Florida Panthers as having the best contract efficiency in 2024. So this is the 2024 offseason prior to this past season, with an A+ rating here. And the aforementioned Matthew Tkachuk, along with Sam Reinhart and Sasha Barkov, contracts had A+ to them. 2 of those 3 missed significant time this past season, which I find fascinating, that their best contracts, they had injury time out, but also they won the Stanley Cup. So,
right. But did they play in the playoffs?
Yes, of course they did.
Okay, just saying.
Right. But the contracts, I think you look at the regular season in some ways, but then the Stanley Cup is kind of bonus time in a lot of ways as it relates to this conversation. Now, interestingly, the number 2 team was the Edmonton Oilers. And so you look at this as a predictive model in some ways. Now, you could say, is it a predictive model or isn't it? The evidence suggests that it is, based on the top 2 teams on their list here. And I find it interesting because even back when it was signed, Connor McDavid's contract was seen as a team-friendly contract, that on the open market, Connor McDavid, even when he signed that contract, could have gotten well over $12.5 million, right? That this was a team-friendly contract. Now that the cap is going off, he can get a ton more. And that's what we're going to see over the course of this upcoming season, right? Leading up to his contract expiring in 2 years. So, after this upcoming season here. But I find it fascinating that as a predictive tool of success based on contract efficiency, they're looking really good with this number 1, number 2 spot here, right?
Can't do better than that, having the Stanley Cup winner at 1 and the Stanley Cup finalist at 2. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And yet, at the same time, where did Florida finish in their division during the regular season?
So the Florida Panthers were in 3rd place in the division.
Right. And yet, when it mattered most, the cream rises to the top.
Correct. Now, it is interesting because both of these teams had a few really highly rate contract grades for forwards, but only 1 top rating for defensemen. So the Evan Bouchard contract was the only A+ for the Oilers. here, and Gustav Forsling was the only A+.
Interesting.
For the Florida Panthers as far as the contracts go and their grades. So there's a lot of similarities there. And interestingly, the Oilers goaltending contract grades were much higher than the Florida Panthers because, again, the Panthers were paying Sergei Bobrovsky $10 million.
Top of market for a
top
goalie.
Of market, of course. But even Spencer Knight's contract was a little bit of an overpay. But the thing is that they had great success with this model for the first two teams. But when you're looking beyond that, that's where things fall off a little bit, where you found some success, but not really playoff success here. So their number 3 team was the Colorado Avalanche that had an overall A-. Then the Carolina Hurricanes with an overall A-. Both teams that made the playoffs, but kind of fizzled in some ways here. I know Carolina made it a little bit further, but the roster that they wound up with in the playoffs was a lot different than the roster that they had at the beginning of the season. So I'm kind of like not really counting that one in a lot of ways here. But the number 5 team on that list was the Vancouver Canucks, which we all know what happened there. And number 6 is the New York Rangers, who famously flamed out this season. So, like, what does that say to you about this model?
It says that it doesn't account for everything. And if you looked on paper, if entering this past season, both the Vancouver Canucks and New York Rangers would be considered among the favorites to do well in their respective conferences. And both teams had chemistry issues, internal issues that the locker room, the teams just imploded. And as a result, they played well below their talent level when it came to wins and losses, and they both missed the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so interesting here is that there were definitely issues here. And both of these teams on paper looked very, very good. Like you could say that with all the confidence in the world that not only were the contracts well constructed, but the teams looked very good on paper. They had excellent coaches. At least I'm hoping so from a Flyers perspective with Rick Tocchet. Let's just make that clear. But I think that, they had all the opportunity in the world, those two teams.
And the Rangers had just won the President's Trophy with the league's best record just the previous year. So, yeah.
And maybe that previous year's playoffs were a fluke, right? So you had to think there was some positivity for the Rangers coming into this past season. Now, the team underneath them was Utah. And I think you can have a rebuilding team with very good contracts, right? Because they have younger, cheaper players, right? That are unproven. So you can pay them less, right?
Right. But they don't grade entry-level contracts in this model.
No.
So that takes a lot of the players on a younger team like Utah out of the equation.
A little bit. And I think, they just managed to get some bargains because they were moving. There was a lot of upheaval. Signing there was taking a risk. So they managed to get some efficient contracts. Another issue, which I think is fascinating relative to all of this, is market size, because I feel like there has to be some sort of weighting in this model for big markets who I think are forced to spend more in some ways. Like you talk about the New York Rangers, you talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs in particular. I think the LA Kings are an exception in some ways because they are a huge market, but from a hockey perspective, I don't think there's a lot of pressure on the LA Kings to spend a lot of money to be good. I just don't think there is.
Or at least there's not the same amount of pressure as there would be on the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Correct.
So, yeah,
Correct.
I could see that.
Yeah, and so we all know what happened with the Toronto Maple Leafs this past year, even though they had supposedly very good contracts. But now Mitch Marner is gone, and we're going to be looking at Austin Matthews. Like, what is he going to be doing? Like, there's a lot of questions there coming up, but the market size and the pressure to spend a lot of money, otherwise you get dinged in the local media.
Right.
I think there's an effect there that maybe you can't really put into numbers.
Yeah, there is an effect there, and it's a mindset that will affect the way teams operate, the way how many big contracts they try to sign, how much money they're going to spend, and what their overall approach is going to be to team building. So that definitely is a factor that maybe only gets considered a little bit in this model on the back end.
Right. So we're going to talk about more of those factors coming up next. All right, so we talked about market size, we talk about pressure to win, we're talking about all these other variables. I think another variable is the tax situation, right? So you have Florida where they can maybe sign some people for a team-friendly deal because there's greater take-home pay for the individual player involved, right?
Right. So if you sign a player to a $10 million deal in Florida, that's a better contract for the player than a $10 million deal for the LA Kings.
Exactly. And so I think that's a factor here that cannot be understated. It is a huge topic of conversation in the hockey world right now. The league is trying to insist that does not play a factor here, but I think it does. I really think it does.
It does. And it's also a disadvantage for the 7 Canadian-based teams who, A, have to take in money in Canadian dollars and pay the players in American dollars, and then B, all the players are taxed by the higher Canadian tax rate than they would be in the United States.
Right. And I think the other major factor here that kind of accounts for a differentiation in results versus contract efficiency is team building, because not only do you have to sign good contracts, but you have to sign a group of players that have collective, like the sum has to be greater than the parts, first off. And secondly, you have to have a balance of skills, a balance of roles. Like, you have to put the puzzle pieces together in a way that's an effective team. It can't just all be good contracts with players of the same skill set.
Right. If you have, 12 forwards who are great passers but don't shoot well, you're not winning a lot of hockey games. You may have great contract value, but you're not winning. And I would add a couple of other factors to that. You need a good balance of young players, players in their prime, and older players who can lead and who have been there and done that, but may not be playing at the same level that they were playing at 5 years ago. You need to have that balance in order to win. So there are other factors that definitely have to be taken into consideration. Leadership is a factor. You need at least 2 or 3 players who will provide that leadership. Coaching obviously is a factor that doesn't get computed into these contracts. And injury luck also, ends up playing a role. When you sign a contract, you don't know whether or not a player will stay healthy for the duration of the contract. So, all of these things are wild cards.
Right.
But I don't think it undermines or eliminates the validity of the model. It just puts a little monkey wrench into the gears, so to speak.
Right. And I would surmise that they don't think that their model is predictive of everything, that it's just a portion of how you look at a team and try to predict its success. But I think then, if you look ahead to this upcoming season, so now they've done this exercise again for the 2025 offseason leading into this upcoming season. And they have the Tampa Bay Lightning at number 1 this year. And they took a jump from the 13th best team in the league with contract efficiency up to number 1. They have an A+. And I mean, I have to say, they did have a very good offseason here.
They did. They most certainly did. And, you know, it's ironic almost because here they have, you know, the superstar goalie in Andrei Vasilevsky, and he's one of their worst contracts, according to the Bible.
Sure. And I think, you know, but this team looks similar to the top 2 teams from the previous year, and that they've got a lot of forwards with really good, highly rated contracts and 1 defenseman with an A+ rated, you know, A- is the top rating that their blue line has. And even like Victor Hedman's contract gets a B+ on their scale here. And I find that interesting that there is some similarities here.
There is. And it looks like this model, you know, prefers a certain way of doing things. But like we said at the top, that model worked very well last year.
Right. Now, conversely, they have moved the Carolina Hurricanes up to number 2 from number 4. And we just talked about how, despite all these efficient contracts, this is a team that just can't get over the hump. They're going to get a round or 2 into the playoffs and then just run out of gas. And I would guess that it's going to be a similar outcome for them this upcoming year. I mean, prove me wrong, Carolina, but I just like, I don't think they did enough this off season, whether they signed good contracts or not on an individual basis, to get them over the top here.
No, I would agree with you that they haven't done enough. And it's one of those things where it's almost hard to put your finger on what's missing from the Carolina Hurricanes, because every year they are one of the top contenders in the Eastern Conference every year, let's say for the last 5 or 6 years. And every year something happens that kind of trips them up come playoff time.
Yeah, I agree. Colorado holds steady in the 3 slot. We'll see if they are able to get back into it this upcoming season. I think the most interesting jump for me overall, aside from that Tampa Bay Lightning jump, which seems obvious to me based on the offseason they had, the Ottawa Senators last season were 17th and now they're 5th. And you know, they had a very good season. They did take a step forward this past year, and then they're fine tuning now, right? And they're bringing back the guys they need to. They're supplementing where they need to. They've got the other Tkachuk, you know, in their corner in Brady. But, you know, like they bring back Claude Giroux, for instance, on a 1-year deal for $2 million, very team friendly, but rewarding him for his contributions to the team that cannot be, you know, understated here. And I just think they, you know, they're making some of those right moves incrementally to continue that growth. And this model reflects that in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I mean, it seems like the model may not get everything right as far as playoff success, but as far as which teams have the best overall build to be successful in the regular season, it's pretty, it has proven to be pretty accurate.
Right. And I'm not suggesting the Senators have a chance at winning the Stanley Cup. I don't think they do, but will they be better than last year? I believe so. I
think so too. I think they're headed in the right direction. And again, it's reflected in these rankings.
Right. And I think, you know, at the opposite end of the spectrum, I do think there's some teams that have like poorly rated contracts overall that are significantly better than they were this past year. I would say your Islanders are on that list for sure. And they're, you know, in the bottom 3 of the league. And you look at the San Jose Sharks that move from 31st to 27th in terms of contracts. Well, they're a rebuilding team and they're going to take on some bad contracts to like eat up cap space for other teams in order to build assets to move forward. So it's only natural that a team like that will absolutely take a step forward this upcoming season in terms of results, but they're going to have some really bad contracts on that team, and that makes sense, and it's okay.
Yeah, and then like you have younger teams like the Chicago Blackhawks. This list only includes that they're next to last. 9 forwards and 2 defensemen are listed because there have so many entry-level contracts that you can't count. So those contracts are good values, but how productive the players will be at this stage in their career remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think the only team that's near the bottom of the list that I think checks out in terms of actually signing some bad contracts is the Nashville Predators.
I knew you were going there. Yeah. And I can't argue with it. I can't argue with it.
No, I think the results are going to align with their contract efficiency rating here.
Most likely.
All right. Well, this was a really fun exercise that I think The Athletic did. Kudos to their team at The Athletic NHL on this endeavor. It's a ton of work, very impressive. I think that, as we've said, it's somewhat predictive, but not entirely. And I'm very excited to check back in with this next offseason to see how they did in their results. That will do it for today's show. I will be here tomorrow with Erica Ayala for the Women's Hockey Report. We are going to be talking about all things Toronto Scepters in the PWHL. And Gil, you will be back on Monday with hosts from around the Locked On NHL channel talking about what's going on with their teams this off season. That'll do it for the show. Have a great weekend, everyone.